Spoiler warning. Consume at your own risk. The movie The Giver is a dramatic film about a colorless community that has given up on the depth of human experience to remove pain and suffering from their society. The story follows Jonas as he receives his position in this community and trains to fulfill it until he grows disillusioned with his community and begins to rebel against it. Our characters are Jonas, our main character, who is trying to become the receiver of memory, the Giver, who is the previous receiver of memory, Jonas's parents, his dad who works with babies and is incredibly gentle and kind, and his mom who is strict and the director of justice, his sister Lily, his friends Asher and Fiona, the baby Gabriel, and the chief elder. Jonas's status quo is all laid out with the opening narration, which tells us about the communities, how they came about, and sets Jonas apart as feeling lost and different, but it also frames the movie, since the narration apparently comes from the future, and he asks if what he did was wrong, which he leaves up to the audience to decide. The inciting incident in the movie comes during the annual ceremony of advancement the community has, where newborns are given homes and names, the elderly are honorably released to elsewhere, 9-year-olds are given bicycles to represent their growing independence and responsibility, and 18-year-olds are given their jobs in society. It is during this last part of the ceremony that Jonas is set apart, as his friends are being assigned to be a drone pilot and a nurturer, respectively. Jonas himself is Skip. He is left to the end of the ceremony, feeling anxious and vulnerable as he was not assigned a job, but was instead selected to be the next receiver of memory, a position that requires integrity, intelligence, courage, and something called the capacity to see beyond. He is told that the position comes with great pain, and the sequence becomes a little culty as they ask him if he is strong enough, and they start to chant his name, something we only ever see again during his ceremony of loss. However, the importance of the position is well established, and so is the idea that there was a previous person selected who failed, so they were more careful this time as they could not afford to fail again. Something that I think the movie does very well is the visual storytelling. The decision to have the entire movie start out in black and white and then gradually become more saturated and vivid with color as Jonas learns about color and emotions and love, and then cut back to grayscale whenever Jonas is not present, was perhaps the best way to translate the society's lack of color and emotions. That, combined with the memory sequences and what memories are tied to which concepts, like red, or snow, or cruelty, or music, or loss, or strength, led to a movie whose visual aspects are also incredibly linked to the story's themes and plot. The first proper splash of color that we see beyond the trees flashing by or a glimpse of Fiona's hair is Jonas seeing a memory of a sunset on a boat, and the color is breathtakingly vivid and saturated. You can see it in the Giver's manner that he is excited to the point of giddiness to give him that first taste of color. This visual storytelling is also used when giving the Giver characterization, such as when Jonas leaves after accidentally being given war. The flashback to when Rosemary leaves is stitched in before we cut back to the present. And that is something else that the film does very well: character development. The Giver starts out surly and stoic, but we come to know him as a prankster, as sarcastic, and someone clearly fond of Jonas. We watch Jonas speedrun the human experience, so he goes from being a naive child to the community's equivalent of a disillusioned rebel between the time of him starting his training and Gabe being scheduled to be released. His friend Asher goes from the boy who can make everyone laugh to the staunchest follower of rules thanks to his assignment, but when push comes to shove, is still Jonas's friend before he is a drone pilot for the community. Perhaps the dynamic I find most interesting is between his parents. Jonas's father, who is compassionate, caring, and willing to bend or sidestep the rules to help but won't break them, and his mother, who is the strictest follower of the rules, asking Jonas for precision of language time and time again, pushing him to tell the chief elder what she wants to know, despite that being against the rules of his position, and even referring to Gabriel as uncertain after he fails his test of maturity and gets sent back to the nurture center. I think the biggest strength of the movie, however, is how well it pushes home the themes of the relationship between pain and pleasure and the importance of individuality. Even from the beginning, the chief elder has been talking about how the community has curbed any impulse that might set someone apart, and brings everyone to the same monotone baseline of sameness, a quality that is done away with hatred, contempt, and pain. The Giver says that they need sameness, but it's phrased as a question to Jonas. who agrees, but he thinks the full breadth of the world is beautiful. The various rules in place over general society and in each position, the removal of color and emotion and most differences of identity, and the ritualization of what few feelings that they do have, all work together to bring about a well-controlled population, making everyone the same. With everything in hand, no one has to suffer. But in removing the possibility of pain, pleasure is also removed. Just as in explaining the first memory Jonas received, the giver says that they removed the causing factors of starvation, the hills and uneven terrain that made transporting food difficult, and the unpredictable weather that left farmers unable to farm. But in removing the cold that would kill crops, they stole away snow, and the activity of sledding with it. They may not have pain or hatred, but nor did they have love. I liked the movie, personally. I think it was fairly well done. My favorite sequences are when the giver says to Jonas that he already had the courage, but to let him give him the strength, and his discussion with the chief elder near the end of the movie. When Fiona is about to be released, the giver is buying time, both trying to convince them to stop and waiting for Jonas to finally cross the boundary. Their discussion is the confrontation between the ideals of the two sides, the community at large and the giver. The giver argues that with love comes faith and hope, but the chief elder, speaking for the community, says that love is just passion which can turn into hatred and contempt. But the fact that the more optimistic point is coming from the one of the two of them that has actually witnessed war and loss and children starving makes his point. They could choose better. They have a blank slate to work with. All they need to be is willing to try. I also loved his subtle jab when they were talking about Jonas, and the chief elder brings up the girl that had been selected before him, and the giver has to restrain himself to just saying she had a name. And when asked if he thought that she didn't remember her name, the giver says he knew she felt her loss. Saying that to a person who you know doesn't have emotions, or at least the same depth of emotions as you, sick burn. But the movie is rated about a C, having an average of 5 out of 10 in most cases, citing that something was lost in translation and that the movie didn't have the same magic as the book. But why is that? What's missing? And how can we fix it? First off, the Chief Elder. I can understand why the Chief Elder was made into the main antagonist rather than the community system at large. It's a lot easier to portray, it gives the community's ideals a spokesperson, and it's easier to write for the screen. I also love her interactions and machinations around the giver. However, I have notes. Meryl Streep did an amazing job. She always does. However, sometimes she did too much for a character supposedly without emotions. Much of the issues and conflicts she gets into seemed between her and the giver, and she flip-flops between being emotionally shallow and almost seeming to have emotions. So, you could either tweak her performance to be a little more dry, or you could make the current portrayal clear and justified. For instance, make it clear that she and the giver used to be a family unit. It's hinted at, but not openly confirmed, and that makes every interaction between them that much more dramatic. Secondly, when she and the giver are going over that every receiver has tried to share his training, have little videos show up to show multiple instances of this happening, including one that is framed between the two of them of a younger version of the giver and the chief elder, perhaps exchanging an apple conspiratorially or talking heatedly while grasping hands. Really anything to signal that the chief elder has skipped at least one injection and thus has the seed of emotion within her as well, just like Fiona. That makes all of her actions canonically justified. Easy. Secondly, the ending. The ending of the movie is open-ended like that of the book, but the adaptation is not one-to-one. The movie's ending is less open-ended and leaves a lot more questions unanswered. Where the book stops at maybe it was just an echo, the movie continues, but that's enough, it'll lead us all home. Continuing beyond the doubt at the end of the novel and into faith. It does, however, keep it unclear whether or not the sled ride down the mountain was a hallucination, a coincidence, or symbolic of Jonas dying, which is made additionally unclear in the novel, as when Rosemary died, her memories were transmitted to the community. However, where the novel has Jonas ride down to a village bedecked in shining lights, movie Jonas ends up at a single house, like the one in the first memory he received, just with color. This raises more questions that are not answered than in the novel. The house has no clear trail but is filled with people singing Christmas carols. Where did these people come from? Is there a wider world out there that knows what Christmas is, since this community has clearly done away with religion? How did all these people get to this house? And on and on and on. This ending could be made to more closely resemble the books, and I think the dialogue, at least, should be brought closer to that. But visually, you could keep the house if you want. Just remove the majority of the people in the house and the fact that Christmas carols are being sung, since we don't really know where they came from. You could also add a small trail in the edge of the scene so that the house looks more livable and less isolated, while also weathering the house to make it look older, or at least less spotless. You can keep the smoke and the lights, since they are symbols of hope, faith, and warmth, but I think that replacing the carols with something more instrumental would suit better. The music still needs to be there, and this way you could even make it a reprise of Rosemary's theme, or one of the other themes in the movie. And lastly, the big one, is to include all of the themes that the book had, and to flesh out the ones that the movie does include more. I did say that it did a good job connecting pain and pleasure and the importance of individuality, but there were more than that, and the two themes it does have can be made deeper. There were messages about the importance of memory and rules and control as well. We need to see that the elders know that without memory they can repeat the mistakes of the past, not just the receiver of memory being an advisor on situations beyond their experience, but also that without memories of the past, there might be no pain and regret, but there is no true happiness as well. We see the rules at the beginning of the movie, notably not laws, but the more parental rules. We see multiple characters act according to the rules of the community or their assignment, surrendering control of their individual actions, so it just needs to be a little played up. We see that the movie encourages the celebration of differences, but it does not quite denounce the disparaging of them or pretending that they aren't there. The relationship between pain and pleasure is there, but we do not quite see how Jonas is drawn to the ideas of love and comfort as much by the memories of pain as the more positive memories. But we can fix that. For starters, I would add in Jonas receiving the memory of a broken leg for a better understanding of pain, and connect the memory of the sunset on the water, the pleasures of sunshine, with the memory of sunburn, tying the connection of pleasure and emotions to the price of the possibility of pain. You could also add back in a more clear first hint of rebellion, with Jonas wishing for the stuff that would impede food efficiency, the hills, the cold, and the snow, even after the giver's explanation following that first memory, which would be a much clearer first hint than him saying that a world without sameness is beautiful. I would also make clear the unfair burden placed on the receiver's shoulders for being the sole person to receive the full breadth of human experience, and the trauma and isolation that comes with that, with only the previous and future receivers being able to fully connect with each other. But also the pity that Jonas feels for his friends and family for not knowing the pleasures of color and love. We get a little bit of that when Jonas asks his dad if he loves him, and his mother admonishes him for using a word so outdated, while his father earnestly tries to answer him, but only comes so far as enjoying Jonas's presence and taking pride in his accomplishments. Lastly, I would play up the moral indignation that he has when he learns what releasing actually is, and his denouncement of his father and the community as murderers, even as he pities them for not knowing what they do. That would drive home the real connection between the importance of memory and the relationship of pain and pleasure, and show the true price for sameness, as death is no longer tragic since life is no longer precious. Other changes between the novel and the movie need a little bit more thought before you undo them. But some of the changes serve, such as having the emphasis be on the birthmark to connect the giver, Jonas, and Gabriel rather than their eye color. Also, Jonas in the movie does not volunteer in caring for the elderly, but there isn't really time for him to do that. Similarly, the way to transmit memories is no longer as intimate as through Jonas's bare back, but the way they do it can be made as visually vulnerable and connecting, and is much easier to film. The big change the movie makes is with Jonas himself. In the novel, he is 12, not 18. That choice inherently takes some of the impact out of the movie, since seeing a near child question his community, rebel, and escape is more expected than seeing an actual child do that. However, I understand the choice. Seeing a 12-year-old trek through the wilderness taking a stolen baby with him could be overwhelming or in bad taste for some people, much worse than seeing a grown teenager do it. If one were to change it back, it would require serious thought to the consequences and benefits. Overall, I think the movie was decent. I enjoy the movie personally, but it may not be for everyone. Visually speaking, it was almost graceful in its storytelling, with the color coming in stages as Jonas learns more and then coming back in a wave, once Jonas crosses the boundary, and smoothly coming back once all the memories are processed by the community. Watching the movie again, I realized that Taylor Swift was in the mix, with Jeff Bridges, Meryl Streep, Brendan Thwaites, and Cameron Monaghan, though with that wig, I can understand why I didn't recognize her the first time. I also learned, in making this video, that Jeff Bridges wanted to start filming the movie back in the mid-90s, and that the script was done around 98, but they faced obstacles until the movie started production in the early 2010s. Also, the principal photography for the movie was done in South Africa, which might explain why Nelson Mandela caps off the sequence of strength, especially since his death was the year before the movie was released. But all in all, this was a fair adaptation of the novel. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace!